Our rewind of the week, a Christmas classic. We've got to talk about Elf. Ash, break it down for us.
So yes, Elf is a 2003 American Christmas comedy directed by Jon Favreau. Starring Will Ferrel, James Caan, Zooey Deschanel, Mary Steenburgen, Daniel Tay, Bob Newhart, and Ed Asner. And the film basically centers around Buddy the Elf, a human who was adopted and raised by Santa's elves, and then he learns about this, and he goes through the candy cane forest. The swirly twirly come drops him through the Lincoln Tunnel into New York City to meet his biological father.
Dad!
So it ended up grossing $220 million worldwide against its $33 million budget.
I like hearing that.
Before Elf came out, Will Ferrel was not the huge movie star that he is today.
That's a joke, isn't it?
He hadn't really had anything come out besides Night at the Roxbury.
No. Yes?
And then Old School dropped.
We're going streaky! Yes!
And everyone was like, why is Frank the Tank dressed up as an elf and acting completely different?
There seems to be a strange man dressed as an elf wandering through Central Park.
So it was just such a great dichotomy of characters that we got to see from Will Ferrel in the same year. But here's the thing, it almost wasn't Will Ferrel in this role. So who was almost cast? Well, when Elf, the script was first going around, it was actually Jim Carrey attached to the role. And we, of course, were already talking about him earlier. He played the iconic Grinch, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, and he was fantastic at that. And it was almost Chris Farley, another SNL alum.
How can we get back on the right track?
I feel like those two would have been great, but Will was just so perfect. He had that earnest, like loving look in his eye the entire movie that just made Buddy so sweet and so special.
You did it! Congratulations! World's best cup of coffee.
This was directed by one of my favorite people on earth, Jon Favreau. He wanted to use a lot of like the old techniques instead of CGI whenever possible, which included like stop motion and forced perspective to make Buddy look huge with his like elf peers and things like that.
The way that they made it so that Will Ferrell's character was like riding on the tricycle, and so it was actually super close up. There was a little kid behind putting his hands, and then you had his dad even further back, Bob Newhart. So it was like a three-person illusion in order just to create that one scene. Jon Favreau did such a phenomenal job on this movie, but he also did quite a few cameos. So of course we saw him play the doctor in the movie. That one's pretty obvious. But he also voiced the narwhal.
Bye, buddy. Hope you find your dad.
Thanks, Mr. Narwhal.
And he also made the rabid raccoon sounds.
I just wanted a hug.
We also had a Christmas Story cameo. Yeah, remember the little kid from Christmas Story who really wanted the Red Ryder BB gun?
You'll shoot your eye out, kid.
Peter Billingsley was one of the elves who was looking out for Buddy.
Buddy, you're not a cotton-headed ninny muggins.
Well, speaking of influenced by Christmas classics, so apparently Elf's production design, I think this is kind of clear in the North Pole scenes, but it was really heavily influenced by Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. I mean, down to the snowman that's talking to him. It's like the same snowman.
What's the matter? Haven't you ever seen a talking snowman before?
Producers actually had to go to Rankin and Bass, who produced all of those movies, and say, hey, we'd really love to be able to pay homage to your movies and have Buddy in the iconic green elf costume. And they had to do a lot of negotiating to even get that snowman and get Buddy approved for the green costume. At one point, they were going to put him in a blue costume, but they had already filmed about half the movie. And they were like, we'll change it in post. We'll change it in post. And Jon Favreau was like, no. A lot of the elf sets were built in an abandoned mental hospital.
I just like to smile. Smiling's my favorite.
Apparently, this was also the location that they shot some X-Files, Final Destination 2, and Jennifer's Body, and See No Evil 2. We talked about Will Ferrell's performance, but he was determined to just be like the perfect elf, and he did it. He did an amazing job. So the scene with the Jack in the Box, where he's like the toy tester that keeps getting scared by the Jack in the Box. Rather than the standard Jack in the Box that would like pop up at the end, they used a remote control, or Favreau had a remote control, so that he could actually just startle him and get authentic reactions while filming that scene.
Like my nightmare, like my personal hell.
The New York City scenes where he's just like frolicking around, jumping through the pedestrian crosswalk, talking to strangers, that was all pretty authentic. So they like walked around the city with Will Ferrel dressed and acting like a real North Pole elf and capturing some real moments with passerbyers in New York who are always super friendly. We're just like, what is going on?
That was an actual person. That was not someone dressed up for the movie, and that just blew my mind when I found that out. He really embraced the role of Buddy to the point where he got a stomach ache multiple times on set. When he's making that spaghetti with the Pop-Tarts and the maple syrup and all the sugar, he actually ate it. They did not swap it out. That was him eating all of that messy, sugary concoction. And Will got sick on set quite a few times, but he powered through because he knew it's what Buddy would have done.
E.T. actually talked to him about that and how he was doing his own food stunts.
I really was eating the gum off the subway. Spaghetti with maple syrup, chocolate syrup, Pop-Tarts, and M&Ms. I got addicted to that. It's kind of like it's very rich, but once you have a couple bites, I started having that for lunch every day. Yeah, I did all my own stunt food eating you see in the movie.
Am I the only one that thinks that the syrup spaghetti kind of looks good?
I'll stick with the coffee now, thanks.
Apparently, Will was offered an obscene amount of money. At the time, it was rumored to be a reported $29 million to do an Elf sequel, and he just flat out refused. And I have so much respect for him for doing so. For that, we say, thank you, buddy.
Guess what? I love you. I love you. I love you.
Well, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Stream Queens, but Ash and I are very curious to know, what are your top 2020 streaming moments of the year? What gave you little bits of bright spots in this otherwise horrific time? Let us know.
Yes, and how do you feel about the Warner Brother HBO Max dual theater situation? Do you think it's a good idea? What are the pros and cons? Let us know using that hashtag Stream Queens, and we'll see you next time.